I'll be taking, we'll take a moment to introduce each of our panelists this morning I'll call on Holly Enowski to assist me in this process. But let me begin in the order that we'll be asking you to open up your comments. And we'll begin with David Beckman, who served as president of Bread for the World and Bread for the World Institute from 1991 to 2020. Leading large-scale and successful campaigns to strengthen the U.S. political commitment to overcome hunger and poverty in the United States and worldwide. And in many ways, seeing David every year at the World Food Prize, where he's a World Food Prize laureate, in many ways, I see him as sort of the conscience of America when it comes to looking at issues of hunger. And we've all looked to him for leadership in that regard. He also founded and served as president of the Alliance to End Hunger. He appears regularly as in many conferences and media, and authored recently a book called Exodus from Hunger. We are called to change the politics of hunger. As most of you know already, Reverend Beckman is a Lutheran minister and also has a degree from the London School of Economics. David, we're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Pierre Ferrari from Heifer International. Mr. Ferrari joined Heifer International in 2010 with more than 40 years of business experience, having served in the private sector as CEO of Coca-Cola, and then in 1995 turned his business acumen and energy to social issues. He served as chair of the board of Ben & Jerry's Homemade Ice Cream and as a former board member of the Small Enterprise Assistance Fund. I've been fortunate to be interviewed by Mr. Ferrari on one of his special programs, and it was a joy. And I must say that he has turned Heifer International into a foremost agent of change in the world today. Mr. Ferrari has a business degree in economics from the University of Cambridge and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Pierre, we're very happy to have you with us as well. Holly, I'll turn to you for the next two introductions.
Awesome. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Our next speaker is Dr. Latte Lawson-Lartego with Oxfam International. He currently serves as Oxfam America's interim co-vice president of global programs. With over 20 years of experience in both the private and nonprofit sectors, Latte also directs Oxfam's food systems work that fights for inclusive, resilient, sustainable, and healthy food systems for all. He leads key program operations while also serving as vice chair of Oxfam's West Africa Governance Group. Before joining Oxfam, he spent 17 years with CARE International, and he also earned 2 master's degrees in economics and business from the University of Lomé in Togo, and social and rural development from Reading University in the UK. So thank you for being here with us, Dr. Lawson-Lartego. And then our last panelist on this great panel is Jason Streubel with Convoy of Hope. Jason is known as Dr. Dirt. Convoy of Hope spoke with us yesterday. We're very affectionate on talking about you. He is the Senior Director for Agriculture and Food Security for Convoy of Hope. Convoy of Hope was founded in 1994 with a mission to feed the world during and following natural disasters. In the last 20 years, it has served more than 70 million people and focuses on the countries of Haiti, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Ethiopia, and the Dominican Republic. Jason has launched agriculture projects for Convoy of Hope in 5 countries. He is an associate professor of biology and applied science at Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri, and an adjunct faculty member at Washington State University, where he earned his PhD in soil science focused on soil fertility. Thank you, Jason, for joining us today.
Holly, thank you. And again, thanks to all of the panelists. We're at a very critical time in history, and it's not just the trite statement. We have seen poverty turn up in the world, as various speakers at this forum on No Poverty were pledged to, as our students have emphasized, to really look at those strategic development goals of the United Nations, with no poverty being the first one. And we were all pledged to try to achieve that by 2030. We may not get there by 2030, but we can pave the way. And if we look to a group of leaders who have a sense of where we can go from here, we turn to you. And you are the visionaries who have been leading major nonprofits to address these issues. And we wanted to have a dialogue among you about those issues. Where can we go from here? Where can we look for direction? And how should we change the way we're doing business in the public and the private sector? So with that, we will lead off David Beckman. If Reverend Beckman, if you would provide us with your thoughts for a few minutes on this, and hopefully we'll go through and have a good time for discussion among you and then with members of the audience as well.
Thank you, Brady. I appreciate this opportunity to talk with these great people on this panel, and also am grateful for all the people who are connecting to this conference. It takes real dedication to connect to a conference like this and to commit time to learning about the possibility of dramatic progress against poverty. It really is within reach. I'm struck that in 1990, about 30% of the world's people lived in absolute poverty. That's a World Bank estimate. I think it's a pretty good estimate. And today it's about 10% of the world's people who live in absolute poverty. So the change for the better has been dramatic. I'm a preacher. I see this as our loving God moving in our history. It's a great exodus. And I think God's calling on all of us to get with the program, to help make it happen. It's not going to be easy, but it really is within reach. I'm President Emeritus of Bread for the World, so I haven't been running Bread for the World for a year and a half now, but I can tell you about Bread for the World. It's a faith-based grassroots movement to get our government to do its part to end hunger and poverty in this country, as well as around the world. It coordinates the advocacy of people, churches, and organizations of all stripes to lobby, mainly to lobby Congress and to some extent the administration on issues that are important to people struggling with hunger. If you're attending this conference, you really should connect to Bread for the World or some other advocacy networks. There are a number of good advocacy networks, but you've got to connect to a network that's following issues in Congress that are important to people in poverty around the world, in this country. You know, you pick one you like that is consonant with your values, but you need that specific information on what's happening and how your senators, how your representatives, what role are they playing, so that you can then contact them. You can just do it with an email or a text or get on the phone and talk to a staffer. But that really makes a difference. It's just really striking to me that over the years to see that on many of the issues that are important to hungry people, 100 folks calling a member of Congress shifts a vote. And if you're part of a national organization, then it's 100 people in virtually every congressional district. And so we've seen it again and again that legislative advocacy works. And if you've got the time and the brains to watch this conference, you need to be involved in legislative advocacy to get our Congress and the president to do their part. Organizations like the organization on this call are significant. They do crucial work, but we need to get the US government to provide a framework in which people struggling, poor people themselves, charitable organizations, state and local governments, the business community, we all have roles to play, but we really need the US government to provide a framework. Let me just talk first about domestic poverty in this country. You know, when COVID hit, millions of people lost their jobs. We had every reason to expect, and there was disruption all over the world. People locked down in Africa, couldn't get out and take care of their farms. So we had every reason to expect huge increases in poverty and hunger. And in fact, there has been a lot of suffering of different kinds. But we now can see that in the US, from census data, poverty was reduced in 2020 and again in 2021. It's just extraordinary. In the middle of the pandemic, I mean, basically what happened was both political parties could see we've got to do something. We got to subsidize businesses, we got to subsidize people. And so they agreed to do some big things, 5 big public investments. And those public investments made it possible for a lot of families to climb out of poverty despite COVID. Bread for the World was very much part of that. In 2020, it had to be done coalitionally. These are huge decisions where dozens, hundreds of organizations work together to push. In 2020, Bread for the World focused on the national nutrition programs, SNAP and pandemic EBT. Those programs were expanded. That helped to reduce hunger. And then in 2021, there was a proposal to expand the child tax credit and to make it available to the poorest families. Bread for the World focused on that. It passed at the end of March. And in the latter half of 2021, we saw child poverty in the United States decrease by 1/3. It's just absolutely spectacular. And a clear demonstration of how political will can translate into help and opportunity for people at the bottom. Now we need to keep pushing. In December, a big bill that included a continuation of that expansion of the child tax credit failed in the Senate by 1 vote. All Republicans voted against it, and Senator Manchin from West Virginia. So it failed by 1 vote. And in January, the child poverty, all those kids who had been able to get out of poverty because of the child credit dropped back into hungry poverty. So my focus right now is to try to rescue some of the really important provisions of the December legislation and get them passed. The Democrats are hoping to get that done before Memorial Day. So right now you can write to your member of Congress, especially your senator, and say, I want you to pass poverty reducing provisions in the next reconciliation effort. On the international side, the story is not as encouraging. The World Bank estimates that the number of people in poverty in the world has gone up by 100 million during COVID. So the disease has killed, 6 million people around the world. But then the disruption of the disease has also caused lots of families to fall into hungry poverty, the kind of poverty that kills kids and the kind of poverty that disables adults. Bread for the World has been pushing on basically on international aid issues. US international aid is important, that it be effective. It provides, it channels much of the money actually through NGOs. I think it's overall, the part of our aid program that's focused on poverty reduction does it pretty well. And Congress, in fact, increased aid somewhat in the early COVID bills, right after COVID hit, in order to respond to the global dimension of this global pandemic. But they just finished appropriations for the current fiscal year, and they didn't increase international aid at all. Last year, the Biden administration used money that had already been appropriated to lead a global effort to provide vaccinations in low-income countries, the poorest countries of the world. And that international effort distributed 1 billion doses to people in places like Mali and Bangladesh. Half of those doses came from US funding. So it's another demonstration that our government can really make a difference when we have the political will to do it, but also the fact that Congress has just decided not to continue that, not to give Biden the money he wants to continue that leadership, is a clear demonstration that we need to weigh in with our members of Congress. That's my initial take. I look forward to the discussion.
David, thank you very much. That was wonderful overview, and we look forward to the discussion as well. We will turn now to Mr. Pierre Ferrari for comments.
Much for, okay, there we go. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion as well. Thank you, David, for telling us what went on in the United States. It was an amazing change there for a while, and hopefully we can get them back on supporting the kind of work that needs to be done. So let me talk a little bit about the work that we do at Heifer. We work somewhat differently. We're very grassroots. We work with, as you know, smallholder farmers, the more impoverished component of the rural communities and economies where we work. We work with about 1 million families, farming families today. And we approach it, this is basically our theory of change, if you like. We begin with this belief that social change, social capital is required before a community of any sort is willing to commit itself to its own escape from poverty and hunger. And we do this through, we've got a thing we call the 12 cornerstones. Essentially, it's a social psychological process that allows them to reflect upon their situation, and that the hope is actually present, that it can actually be activated with the right kind of resources and support that Heifer provides. So this particular piece, we call social capital, is critical. We find that if we don't do that work with the communities, very little gets adopted and the work that is done evaporates. And that's a bit of a difference from several other nonprofit operations. So that component is work that we do before we really plan or engage the communities in anything meaningful, such as teaching them how to take care of the livestock or other agricultural activities. The second piece is a strong belief that collective action is required. And we do that through the formation of co-ops and other systems so that the farmers can work together to take advantage of the power of leverage that assemble collective action creates. Most of the farmers we work with are essentially exploited and are the subject of predatory behavior on the part of the system that exists in which they live, whether it be livestock systems or agricultural product systems or whatever. The recognition that they are indeed exploited and taken advantage of, whether it's coffee or milk or whatever it is, there is no question that there is substantial exploitation, which sinks them into poverty and malnutrition. So forming cooperatives to create collective action, to give them a better balance of power vis-a-vis the systems in which they exist, whatever the commodity is critical. The third piece is, through experience, we have learned that the idea of projects that last 3 to 5 years to change the system that has impoverished people for generations is simply absurd. What we've committed to at Heifer is long-term participation and presence with the communities. And the long-term is required because systems that are in place have been refined and fine-tuned to take advantage of the vast numbers of smallholder farmers, but for the benefit of others. So our perspective is to try and create pro-poor wealth-creating value chains, create collective action, organize the farmers through cooperatives so that they can take advantage of profitable markets that exist. And profitable markets indeed exist. So we train the cooperatives, we train the farmers into better practices, and we're known as a livestock operation. And indeed, we work a lot with dairy and goats and chickens and all of those. one of the reasons is that a lot of livestock activities for farmers where we work is indeed profitable, and it provides nutrition as well, eggs and milk, etc. So you can see how we construct this value, this change, this theory of change from organizing the community to be sure that it's committed to its self-reliance and autonomy, and then slowly but surely building the infrastructure with which they can take advantage of the capital that we organize for them and others. So that's the construct, and through collective action and understanding of markets through the training we provide, the farmers are able to obtain a substantial increase in or a capture of the value that's created by their productive work. We measure the end of poverty, which is one of our mission statements, and ending poverty, through a technique or a measure called living income. We find that most communities we work with are very substantially behind living income. It's basically a baseline income that allows them to live a dignified life, which covers nutrition, clothing, shelter, education, etc. We're very disciplined about measuring that, and then we organize the work to be done so that the communities can reach living income. In terms of what COVID did for our communities is because they were well organized through the cooperatives, they were able to come back to us very rapidly and said, listen, we can't get our goods to market. We need a truck. We need something so we can take our goods to market. And we did that. We actually supported the deployment of substantial number of transportation trucks so that they could actually take their markets to, because the market continued to exist. People had to eat every day, et cetera, right? We're talking about urban centers or peri-urban centers. And that actually provided them with the resilience that they needed to actually be able to continue to move their goods to market. That was very successful, and it continues to be successful. Interestingly enough for us, it accelerated our work to provide the kind of autonomy that these collective co-ops were able to do to provide, to move their goods to market. In addition to that, we're finding that infrastructure, whether it be storage, cold hubs, transportation, processing, it is the way with which systems can be reorganized to benefit the poor, the very poor. And we're finding that in spite of the fact that they're not particularly well educated, they're smart as hell and are able to understand how the market functions and able to take advantage of the infrastructure and the systems that Heifer is able to open up to them. So there's lots more to tell, but I've just come back from Nepal, and it's fascinating how this particular model works well. It works in very different ways. This is not a solo act on the part of the farmers. It actually cooperates with local municipalities and government and local banks, so that once you have a collective action on the part of the farmers and cash flow begins to flow, they are now substantially, or the other community members, the stakeholders, are very interested in participating and engaging them to actually continue and to scale up the work that's being done. I'll stop there.
Pierre, thank you. You touched on two things close to my heart. T.W. Schultz said the farmers are smart. The poor people are smart. Give them an opportunity, they'll take advantage of it. And of course, the co-op experience from our own country here with pigs, as I grew up in 4-H, so it really was.
Oh, you did? Yeah,
close.
okay.
So we can continue your emphasis on collective action. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to our third panelist then, Dr. Latte, Lawson-Lartego, Oxfam. Doctor.
Thank you so much. I have a PowerPoint. Let me see if I can share my screen. I cannot. Holly, can you help me? I think I sent it to you. I sent it another one like a few minutes ago.
Do you want me to share the one? Do you want me to share the one that you just shared me?
Yes, please. Yes,
Okay.
please.
2 seconds.
As you share, just to make a few remarks to say, We are now living in, as we all know, in a very specific time with hunger hotspots that we are seeing all over the world, actually. East Africa, Horn of Africa, West Africa is also emerging as hotspots. And more we see that obviously with the crisis in Ukraine. So I'm going to speak briefly about Oxfam and what we do in the food system. Can you go to the next slide, please? So Oxfam, we believe that the future is equal. We want to be hopeful and working towards equality for everyone on earth. That's our dream. That's our end goal. We are not there yet. We know that poverty is still here, and poverty is not inevitable. It is a result of human action and inaction. So I think your point about collective action speaks to the core of Oxfam and what we do. So all of us, those living in poverty and those who are not, have a role to play. So I think the collective action, people's power, is something that we put a high price on within Oxfam. Next slide, please. So in the food system, we have a call to action. We believe that the way we get our food from our farm to our tables can be equitable, can be nourishing, and can be sustainable, right? And we believe there's still plenty of food for everyone on earth, even with the climate change issues and obviously more conflict that we are seeing. But for that to happen, we need to change a host of harmful policies and practices from top corporates and governments down to local communities and food entrepreneurs. I will speak about that in a few minutes. And particularly, we as Oxfam, we put a strong focus on women and youth, because we believe they are most of the time the marginalized group. And if we look at gender equality, we can also solve poverty. So we put already a strong emphasis on gender equality within Oxfam. Next slide, please. So we have a vision for the 2030. We want the food system to be nourishing, equitable, regenerative, and resilient. And the way we do this as Oxfam, as Pierre said, for Heifer, we also work a lot with smallholder farmers in Africa, Asia, Latin America, around the globe, and also food entrepreneurs and food workers. Here in the US, we also work with food workers on their rights so that they can increase their power, their livelihoods, their resilience, and obviously food security. We also work on educating consumers, because we believe, even myself, you here, students, we all consume food. So we have the power. We have the power to influence how our food is produced and how our food is distributed. And we can really change the game if we mobilize as consumers. And we also advocate strongly, and sometimes we partner with governments and private sector for systemic change. And the last thing we try to do is also to really influence the debates on our global food system through a host of public forums. We do research, we have partnership with universities and research institutes, so we can generate the evidence, hopefully to change the debate and policies. So we were asked to think about COVID and the impacts on the on foods, and also the emerging food crisis. So obviously, we also how the food supply chain was quite disrupted, right? So we saw a large vulnerability in the food supply chain here in the US, where we went to grocery and we didn't find our favorite meal, favorite brands. So we saw that around the globe as well, right? Not just here in the US. So we have to do something about that. We also saw the importance of food workers, people who are in the front line, people who sell our foods. We saw how critical they are so that we can all be fed, especially during COVID. But we also saw few companies who took advantage of COVID. and I will speak briefly about that. And more with the emerging crisis, as I said, in the Horn and Sahel, and also existing hotspots, like in the Horn of Africa, we are seeing that about 21 million are really exposed to food insecurity because of number of crises. So what we try to do during this COVID time is really to pivot what how we work and develop new programs that can really help us to contribute. So doing a lot of research, advocacy on hunger issues, and who are taking advantage of the current situation. We provide immediate emergency response. We advocate strongly with food companies, the like of Amazon or Walmart, etc. here in the US, so they can protect their workers, right? Worker rights. We also advocated a lot on living income, obviously living wage as well. And more we are looking at how can we also push for a more localized food system instead of people in Africa depending on Russia to send them weeks before they can make their bread. So those are a few things that we have been doing as Oxfam. Next slide, please. Just to give you a sense, so more we are talking about the four issues, the four factors actually. So you have conflicts. You have conflicts in number of, Ukraine is one, but you also have conflict in Ethiopia. You have conflict in the Sahel. So conflict is also increasing food insecurity and may also lead to hunger. Climate change is the key driver as well. What we are seeing in the Horn of Africa right now is a severe La Nina-induced drought. So water shortage. So farmers are not able to get enough water to do farming. So that's also leading to food insecurity. And the pandemic obviously is a big issue that we saw and we continue to see, and also the inequality. Like last year, we did a study to find that the biggest food companies have paid 18 billion to their shareholders, in the time of crisis. So there are few companies, few people who are taking advantage of the issues while many people go to bed hungry. We did a study as well last year to find that about 12,000 people can die of COVID, can die of hunger instead of COVID. And personally, I'm from West Africa. I spoke to my mom at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, and her first worry, she's in her 70s. Her first worry was hunger. If nothing is done, if government doesn't take action, there will be food shortage. So we saw that as well. So those are really the key alarming issues we are seeing around the globe. Next slide, please. So as Oxfam, quickly, we have been quite active. We have reached out of up to about 14.3 million people with all kinds of supports, pushing cash, food assistance, but also working on water, sanitation, and issues like that. Can you go to the next slide? I will go quick. So as I was saying, food emergency support, because we still have a strong emergency response, but more and more we are also pushing to work more with local humanitarian leadership, because COVID has also shown us that obviously sitting here in the US is difficult to go with COVID, to go to those countries. So promoting the emergence of local leaders who can respond to those crises from the get-go. And we have also worked a lot on education because of the COVID, the pandemic. As we know, classrooms were closed. So providing education online, on mobile phone, and advocating for government to continue to really support education. So those are a few things that Oxfam has done with our partner globally to respond to the COVID issues. The next slide, please. So a new initiative we have also launched in partnership with Second Muse, which is quite a nimble organization here in the US, is also to look at the urban issues. because one trend we saw with COVID is food insecurity is no longer a rural phenomenon. We saw people in cities, in former settlement like Nairobi, being really hungry. So what we are doing now is really to promote a more localized urban food system that is able to really feed the growing population. The trend is by 2050, 70% of the world population will be living in urban areas. So we really need to get ahead of that. So we are working on urban food issues as we speak. The next slide. We are also doing a lot of advocacy, as I said earlier, with government in Africa, in Europe, here in the US, to continue to protect food issues, to continue to invest in food, because obviously with the pandemic, we saw a lot of investment in health, which is really important, but we also want to make sure that investment continue to go to food issues to avert hunger around the globe. The next slide, please. And we are also working with the corporate sector. As I said earlier, Oxfam launched a campaign like 6 years ago. We call it Behind the Brands. So we saw that about 10 corporates, global corporate, dominate the food system. Yeah, the next slide, please, around the globe. So we work with them to also make sure that they are more inclusive and work with their traders, like the companies who provide, who supply food to them, so they can also look into the equity issues, climate change, gender equality, paying living income for farmers, but also living wages to the workers. So we work on some of those issues with corporate sector. And the next one, I think I have maybe one or two more slides. Yeah, so as we speak, we are also doing a lot of advocacy in the Horn of Africa, because as I said earlier, we see the emergence of hunger in the Horn of Africa. About 21 million people on the brink to be food insecure, especially if nothing is done and if the rain doesn't come. So it's quite alarming. Our executive director was in Somalia last week and just saw firsthand how women, young people, children are really suffering from this phenomenon. So we are also advocating for the issue to be able to get the attention. And we see the same trend coming up in West Africa as well, with over 27 million people estimated to also be on the brink of hunger. So the Ukraine crisis is another one, obviously, and Oxfam is responding with our affiliate in Europe, even here from the US, mobilizing support, advocating with the US government to protect refugees and hopefully to solve this crisis. And the last one is just some quick call to action. So we are really advocating and calling government and donors to bridge the gap between what people can pay and higher prices, because with the conflict in Ukraine, we see prices are really going up. In West Africa, it's estimated to be 30% up. So we are calling on government to really take action and donors to support that. We are also calling on government to deliver the much needed aid to people facing severe hunger in Ukraine, but also all over the world. And in the long term, we are calling for government to support the development of sustainable, resilient, and local food system based on small-scale production, family farming, because people have to eat, and they have to be able to have access locally to get those foods. So those are a few things that Oxfam has been doing, and thank you for your attention.
It was very comprehensive and exciting approaches that you're taking, and much food for thought. We'll move now to our final panelist, Jason Streubel, Dr. Streubel, Convoy of Hope.
Yes, thank you so much. And I will tell you that it is an honor to be here. I've had the opportunity to be sit under several of you in conferences, but not be able to be on a panel. So it is an honor for me and to represent Convoy of Hope on what it is that we're doing around the world and addressing some of these issues. So Convoy of Hope is here in Springfield, Missouri. So we are a Missouri NGO, and as you look at our highlights for 2021 and kind of our bread and butter and the things that we do, we are a organization that if you look at who we are, we say we want to feed the world and that we have a driving passion to be able to do that. But that underlining piece is that we want to find ways and to work with local communities, foreign and around in the United States and around the world, to really break that systemic cycle of spiritual and physical poverty. And how that spells out for us, if you look at where we were just globally last year, we were in 29 different countries around the world in over 3,000 locations, where as we're working with communities and focusing on asset-based community development, where I've been with Convoy now for 11 years, and people hear me say all the time, if we are feeding kids today and we're feeding their kids, then we have failed. Our job is to build the community and to bring food when necessary, but then build those that resilient system with the community so that years later, and I love what Pierre said, the 3 to 5 year, you have to think beyond the 3 to 5 year. And sometimes you can have a great success in that, but really I say compassion is messy and failure is an option. We are dealing with people, we are dealing with pandemics, we were dealing with sociology and society. And so you have to bend the rules of what is a 3 to 5 year window, and you've got to go long term. And so as we build that community, we want to be able to step back, leave the community far better than we left it, and be a shadow where someday people will go, oh, that's right, there was an organization that called Convoy who helped us make that start. And domestically, we're really known for our international disaster response. So if you look at over the 70 plus organizations that are in national VOAD that do disaster response, we are one of the top 5 that can deploy who we are and be self-sufficient. We can go into an area and we can feed ourselves, we can gas ourselves, we can power ourselves, we can shower ourselves, but at the same time, because of our logistics presence that we have here in Springfield, we can not only respond to the disaster self-sufficient, but also we have an arm that allows us to develop or deliver supplies on demand. And so that's our, disaster response is one of the greatest things that we do, both internationally, but on the domestic side, just our footprint, because we are so nimble and we have the opportunity to do self-deployment, self-sufficient deployment into a community, but also the delivery of goods, foods, cleaning supplies as we're part of that piece. We also work within urban cores in the United States, being able to bring together as a catalytic effect for faith-based, non-governmental, governmental groups to be able to logistically hand out supplies and connect the underserved to the services that we have here in the United States. And so to be able to bring those groups together and get those products and services in the hands of the people who desperately need them the most. And there's other things that we do as well as, on the advocacy side and working in the United States. We work with rural communities on connecting the faith-based community with the government and make sure that those that they're connecting together and they know how to operate as community shareholders. And that if you're even working with a rural pastor, reminding them that they should know the members of their school board and they should know the police chief, because as we do community together, the church is an integral part. And we want to be an asset and not a hindrance to how the community views us. Internationally, like I said, we were in 29 countries around the world in over 3,000 locations, and both with what we would call brick and mortar, and it looks like a Convoy of Hope. It's a registered NGO, and a lot of times it's also in partnership. And because we are in Springfield and because we kind of know that we aren't the biggest out there, but yet we're significant, we're always looking for partners. We are always looking to partner well, because if we can't do it, we want to find a partner who can. And so if you're out there, know that we are offering partnership. We don't want to do it all. We want to focus on what we can do and to partner with all of us. But in that piece of how we are creating that exit, it really looks like children's feeding, women's empowerment and gender equality, and then looking at food systems and agriculture. So last year we fed over 46,000 kids during the school year in those 29 different countries. And we're looking at the nutrition, we're looking at caloric intake, we're making sure we've got WASH included, and we're doing everything we can to be part of good development and what that means, so that we're not just delivering food and forgetting it, and there's systems in place that are there. We also then, as we're keeping kids in school, and we all understand the benefits of keeping a kid in school and deworming in school, we increase their income, we increase their ability. We're looking at feminine hygiene products and all of those different pieces. We also focus on women and girls because we know the power of a mom, and we also know the power of investing in a young girl, keeping them from, letting them see the opportunities that they have in front of them. So with our women's empowerment, we really focus on economics, helping moms that are underserved be able to start their own business, do market training, be able to do market analysis, and then part of a mentoring program, they start their businesses, staff follow them for up to a year in some cases to be able to mentor along, and then savings co-ops and saving groups to be able to increase their economic viability, to start those businesses, but also the skill set to look at the system to know when markets are shifting, how to shift, when to shift, and how to look at all those different pieces and not just be so focused on just that one trade, but how can I increase and how can I expand as markets are there. Working with girls on self-efficacy and feminine hygiene and their worth, to be able to just remind them who they are and that they have value, and they have value from the very beginning, so that we can continue to invest in them. And then a lot of times when we're working with women around the world, we will set up really social avenues where moms and women can interact with one another. And so they can talk about the stuff of life, so that they can start building that resiliency as a group, as we talk about health and nutrition, child rearing, and those pieces. And then lastly, it's really the agriculture piece. And you heard from my bio, I'm a soil scientist by training, and I grew up on an orchard. I've been paid in agriculture since I was 5 years old. I know what it is in third grade to go pick strawberries after when school's out. And I smell and sniff dirt everywhere that I go, because agriculture, you feed the soil, you feed the world. And I'm always biased, but it's that last piece of being able to look at the food system, the family food system, the community food system, and just all the great things that you heard Pierre talk about from a food system standpoint. How can we build that internal extension system? How can we build that resiliency? Because I will say, if you teach someone about agriculture, you build their capacity. And if you build their capacity, you increase their food security. And if you increase a person's or a community's food security, you build resiliency. And when you have resiliency and hope, you can change the life of a child, you can change the life of a community, you can change a country, and you can change the world. And that is those pieces that Convoy really does, based out of Springfield, but relying on a network of partners and individuals all around the world. So there's that's who we are, because sometimes people are like, who's Convoy? But we're very proud to be in the Forbes list, and also based here in Springfield, Missouri. And as we look at COVID, wow, from an organization that tries to feed kids during the school year and is known for their logistics, it was disruptive. COVID was crazy. COVID, you have to be quick on your feet when you're dealing with any of the NGOs that are represented and you have COVID hit. But what was the byproduct of COVID for Convoy? For us, COVID showed us that our theory worked. And part of the reason, as we deal with, again, you'll always hear me, it's messy and there's things that will always go wrong. There's always outliers. Even under the perfect day, you're still going to get some bug that shows up that no one thought about in a field. And you're going to have a truck that breaks down, or you're going to have, a riot on a corner that you didn't expect. But one of the things that we do as we're looking at our asset-based community development, we understand that the faith-based community is part of our key stakeholder. And we partner with that faith-based community. And it's always been part of our, really one of our biggest things. We understand the humanitarian code of conduct, and it doesn't matter on their gender, their faith, we will work with anybody. But when we work with the faith-based community, regardless of how anybody in the audience views the faith-based community, the key tenet of somebody who believes in scripture, in the Bible, is their sole rule of faith, is that they're commanded to love God and love people. So regardless of how or what we view as the church and the big C and all of the failures that we see, the faith-based community by tenet is supposed to be more focused on their outward community than on their inward community. And so by partnering well with faith-based communities and helping strengthen them to really shepherd and work with their community, how do you feed 465,000 kids in a school day when there is no school? The community who has started to take ownership becomes your logistical arm. And it's that faith-based community working with the schools, knocking on doors, delivering food rations, and getting it from point A to point B. And because we have taken a very inclusive approach, when some groups didn't have governmental favor, we had police escorts because they know we would go from that school to that location to that family, and it didn't matter where those families came from. So for us, obviously, there's logistical things that we all had to struggle with from the food side, but it showed us that when you really do believe in asset-based community development and want to empower the local community, then when something like COVID hits, it works. And so for us, it allowed us to now continue to look forward and strengthen and build better systems to even increase that capacity of our local leaders so that there's that continued local ownership. And so for us, we distributed, we did more than we've done in the past because we mobilized that network of volunteers and volunteerism and those communities and those schools and those school principals with the faith-based community, and we got food to where it needed to be. I think that as we, look at trends and as we look at things, you heard Oxfam and you heard Pierre really talk about the local food system needs to increase the capacity. We have to be able to increase the co-op. We have to be able to look at the regional and the local food system and what that means. Because when global food supplies are fractured, or when your number one exporter of sunflower is currently under attack, that's going to move things down the road. When you have shipping lanes that are already full and being purchased 1 to 2 years or more out, you've got to be able to look at that, building the capacity of that local food system. So we really are looking at how can we continue on the agriculture side to feed, to train the trainer and build that local piece with the continued increase of co-ops, but capacity, and look at all the tools in the toolbox. Because I think that, one of the untold stories of all of COVID came out of Haiti. You've got Haiti, as we know, is a country that is on a razor's edge daily of collapse and really dealing with a failed government now for over 2 years. And in the middle, you had an earthquake. When the earthquake hit in 2010, the country really shut down for 3 to 4 days. You had liquefaction at the airport, and you had all of these different things where no one really knew what to do, including the faith-based community. But as Convoy and our largest partner on the ground, Mission of Hope, has done some incredible things in building those different pieces. And when that earthquake hit, and so this example of what success can happen when we really just let asset-based community development and the development of leaders on the ground really take over. Within 3 hours of that earthquake, with different partnerships, there were 5 Haitian leaders, doctors, nurses, logistics, and engineers who were on site at the earthquake, being able to do incident command back to the Haitian leaders across the island, but also leaders here in the United States, and running that logistics on how we could get product from Springfield to other partners in Haiti and throughout. And it was all Haitian led. I think we all know that that's really what good development does, but we saw just a little fraction of it work in Haiti, that we know that between partners distributing the food, or even allowing, or even seeing just Haitian leaders rise up and do their first 2 weeks of incident command in the middle of an earthquake, was an amazing success of what can happen and what we hope all around the world as we partner with all of the different agencies to build independent, strong communities who are self-supporting and feeding themselves. And I think that's the continued trend for the future.
Oh, Jason, thank you. And thanks to all of you for wonderful panelists. I wanted to give each of the panelists a chance to briefly just react. I know, Holly, keep us on time here. I don't want to run over, and I want to allow questions from the audience, but what an exciting set of ideas you've laid out. And I'm just going to mention some phrases I heard. Resiliency and hope. Asset-based community development, local-based food systems. Linkages among institutions. Collective action. And very importantly, advocacy. Wow, those are 5 themes. You had many others, but I was trying to capture the essence of what some of you talked about, and you gave such rich examples of so many of these concepts. Could I just go back around quickly? Any reaction you have, or give you an opportunity just to ask a question of each other, or make further comments for just a moment? I'll let you choose. Yeah, David, do you want to say anything?
Sure. I was also really struck that there was a lot of common wisdom that we shared. We can reduce poverty. Systems are important. Advocacy is important. The local organizing local people to fend for themselves is important. I was struck by that. I also got a chance to focus on Jason's button, and I love it. The I voted button today, because really, that's not, NGOs are not usually promoting voting or picking candidates, but it really, now that I'm not running an NGO, I'm putting more of my time into getting good candidates elected, and thinking about the 2 parties and how to strengthen, make parties better on poverty issues. And then also, I've become a stronger Democrat, because I just think the Republican Party is, I've worked in a bipartisan way all my life, but in the last few years, they've really been tough on poor people. So I'm trying to get Democrats elected. So I'm glad you're voting.
Yes, Pierre.
Oh, good. Thank you for the. Yeah, I think the role of advocacy is really important. We at Heifer don't do any of that directly, but we have found that if you have success in the field with the community, either through collective action, co-ops, etc., you suddenly are engaged and working with a community that has voting power. Right, which is interesting. So the local municipalities and local provincial government begin to pay attention to you and begin to pay attention to the issues of the community. So it's a little bit of the reverse sort of theory of change, right? You do advocacy to change the lives of the poor, or maybe you change the lives of the poor to say, so the leverage there is interesting, and we're finding that's happening. Many of, and I think you made a comment that you like the fact that we see local farmers as being very smart. They may not be well educated, but as you organize them and they begin to have success, they begin to think that they want to represent. They actually want to run for office, and they do very successfully. You actually have one Heifer farmer, if we like to call her that, representing in the national parliament, and she is very, very vocal indeed, because she knows what her people need. You know, she comes from the communities. So anyway, I just wanted to make that point, that the advocacy pathway can actually come from success in the field, which then argues for the right kind of change.
Others? Any others want to make comments at this point?
Yeah, I can chime in quickly. No, I think what I hear from the other panelists are, quite resonate very well with what we believe in Oxfam and what we do, and even my career in this space for about 20 years. And more we are really putting the focus on localization, empowering local leaders who are closer to the issues. I think Jason spoke about that, Pierre and David. So I think for us it's extremely important. So those people who are closer to the issues, they understand the local context better than anyone else, and supporting them, creating the enabling environments around them so they can really lead. And we saw that firsthand with this COVID, right? Like many international organization staff were stranded. We could not travel, but then we have to really rely on those local leaders. And we saw also the women, the gender piece, where you really create the space for women to lead. They just shine, and we ought to really continue to support that as well. So, and the last thing is the local food system as well. It's just so critical, so that those, when you see the Horn of Africa, West Africa, the dependency is really high, and we ought to really close that and have more self-sufficiency in food production. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any follow-up questions among the panelists? If not, let me say we've had a number of questions.
I think I've just.
Jason.
One thing I wanted to raise from the group is the importance of capital, the need for working capital, need for capital expenditures. The need is enormous, is in the trillions of dollars, and the starvation of the food system, especially the smallholder food system, not having access to capital, is one of the major poverty traps. I just wanted to raise that because it wasn't explicitly mentioned by anybody, I don't think. But whatever we can do to mobilize capital to go into the field, and the returns on investments are very good, actually. That's our experience anyway. So.
Good, thank you, Pierre. It's a very important point, and it links, I think, with that asset-based community development kind of concept also that you spoke about earlier. Okay, I'm going to turn to questions now coming in from listeners, and let me just provide one that I know each of you will have some thoughts about. The question and statement from Reed Middleton was that many people and organizations hold the goal of, quote, creating a more equal world, end quote. But because we have yet to live in a world with complete equality, we don't know exactly what that would look like. In your opinion, what specific indicators will let us know when we have reached the goal of equality? Let me just throw that open. It's you can argue with the question, talk about aspects of it, whatever. Any of you want to take a whack at that? Pierre. Yes.
So I think equality is pretty abstract as an idea. The way we're approaching it is that, well, rather than think about equality and redistribution and things that have political implications that are very difficult to manage, we say, okay, how do we get, what does the end of poverty mean in a particular community? And we've landed on this idea of a living income, which is similar to living wage here in the United States. And if the living income is well defined and calculated, then I think at least we've achieved the first step in some kind of equality or balance between between the various groups, which is that these people, these folks, can actually live in dignity. Let's get that done first. And I think that's very quantitative, it's very achievable. And I know that it's inspired a lot of governments to say, okay, that's what we should be doing. If, for example, a community is earning $2,000 a year, the family is earning $2,000 a year, and they actually need $7,000 to live in a kind of dignified way. How do we find, what are the ways to actually fill the $5,000 gap between the current base and the living income base? And it's amazing how, I come from a business background, as you mentioned. It's amazing how that particular calculation focuses efforts, and you begin to calculate, all right, if we do this, what kind of contribution does that make to filling the gap? And I think you find that a lot of the activities that we're engaged in doesn't actually fill in the gap at all. It doesn't have an impact at all. So why are we doing it? I'm a real believer that if you provide money to the community, and I think the experience here in the United States in terms of the work that we've been doing, or the work that the government provided in terms of all the subsidies, actually shows that providing money to the families has a dramatic impact on nutrition and poverty. So that's a way to approach the equity issue.
Pierre, thank you. David, I see you.
I agree that reducing poverty is the priority, but inequality, the gross inequality in our country nowadays, the gross inequality in the world, is a problem in itself. The Bible talks about, people who were adding rooms to their houses while other people were in misery, while widows and orphans didn't have enough to eat. And that the proximity, the fact that, in fact, it's really easy to, if you have money, to expand your house, to have more and more. You forget about people who live in another part of town who don't have enough to eat. And I think it also has implications for politics and in institutions. Rich people have a lot of influence. And so gross inequality, we don't have to worry that we're going to have an equal society or an equal world. We're a long way away from that. But I think addressing the gross inequality in our society and our world will help us will give us resources, but also a little bit more political oomph. Partly it's what Pierre's saying is that, the equipment of low-income people to speak for themselves in Africa or in this country, that helps to shift things. But on the other side, some moderation of gross inequality will give us more resources and also reduce the imbalance in political decision-making in politics, but also all of our institutions. In many institutions, the boards are more loaded with rich people now than they were 10 or 15 years ago, because our country is becoming so unequal. And that makes a difference in the policies of universities, colleges, NGOs. So I think I've come to see that inequality in itself, extreme inequality, is a problem.
Thank you, Reverend Beckman. Anyone else? Jason?
Yeah, I'll throw in just a couple quick comments to go beyond that, but also maybe go a little more just in a little granular piece. When, what would be some indicators? There's a long list of how you would measure self-efficacy, how we would measure health, how we would measure, does somebody know they're, looking at protective rights. One of the questions that even with working with girls, is there 3 locations where you could go where you could feel safe? And that's one of those questions where yes or no. So I think for me, we've got these big issues, but I will always go back as, for me, and this is Jason, not necessarily Convoy, but, as we go down into the piece, if we can make difference in the local community and continue to expand, That's why partnership is so important, where you've got Bread for the World, who is the champion. I didn't write my first letter to a senator until I was in a meeting with Mr. Beckman. I mean, that's just the reality. I wrote a senator. But as you're working with a girl and you're working with a mom in a community, and you ask them the question, now that you have these pieces, how much do you feel like you can be a leader in your home? And when they were at a scale of 2 and now they're at the scale of 8, those are things that we can measure. Do you feel like you have economic choice? Do you feel that you can be a leader in your community? Do you have the respect of your husband? Those are all things that we can start to quantify to move us forward at the granular level. And then we'll always be working to hit these big issues. But there's all kinds of indicators out there and some great orgs that just focus on those pieces, and they're there and they're in the literature.
Thank you. Latte, you wanted to say a word?
Yes, I can just say a quick word. That's our theory of change. In Oxfam, we believe that the future should be equal. And obviously, we look at it from a different perspective, but just to provide some specific example here, I think Pierre talked about the living income. We fully believe in that, and we are working toward that. Living wages here in the US, clearly we want us to be able to have a decent living, right? Just the right to unionize, right, and to advocate for their rights. I think that's something we believe in. On the bigger scheme, we look at the taxation system, right? Is the taxation system fair enough to really create the resources for people, for government to invest in social issues? So I think we look into those kind of stuff. When you take the gender piece, I think Jason alluded to that, just for you to know, in many countries, again, around the globe, women, when we talk about food system, women still don't have, many women don't still have access and access to land and land as property. So they don't have land rights. Despite the national policy, they have customary policy. So those are just pieces that we can move along to have this kind of equality. When you look at the climate change issues, we are now taking even an equality framework, right? The climate justice. Because when you look at rich countries here in the US and poor countries in Africa, there's just so much disparity in terms of who are emitting more and who are paying the price, right? So I think we can look at it from many perspectives, but I believe we should be moving toward more equality, and we can measure that easily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the panelists. We have one final question, and then we're going to need to conclude because we have a keynote coming up here in just a few minutes. But we want to give each of you a chance just to make a comment to sort of wind up what's been a very inspiring session. And the final question that came in was, is there, quote, spiritual advocacy, end quote, happening within faith-based organizations? So if anyone wants to directly address that question.
I'm a preacher, so I want to start with,
Yes.
So my take on it is, sure, it's really important. I mean, I think many churches pray for people in need. They pray for the Ukrainians. They pray for people in South Sudan. And I think that's really important. Not all churches do. And in fact, in many churches, people have really mean attitudes toward policies that would reduce poverty on a large scale. I think part of the persistence of poverty is a spiritual problem. And so teaching in faith communities about what God requires, what our loving God wants for poor people, how we can be part of that, how we can be effective, I think that's really, really, really important. We're not going to get the kind of change we want in the world until we get substantial changes in the spirituality of people in this country and around the world.
Yeah, thank you, David. Well, let's, any final words? Let me just give every panelist an opportunity to, at least for a sentence or two here as we wind up the session. Anything you want to leave, reflections as we look to the future for our guests? So
I'll just
yes,
leave this final thought, especially for those who are students in the room that are participating. Do something. It doesn't matter where you start, do something. And if it doesn't work exactly the way you wanted it to work, great. You learned a way that it didn't work, and just keep doing something. And our founder says it all the time, do the next thing in front of you and be kind doing it.
wonderful, wonderful. Anyone else?
Love that, Jason. I think action, that's what we believe in as well, people's action. So please call your senator, as our esteemed David Beckman said, and Oxfam is also pushing for that. You can go on our websites. We all look for people to take action on many kind of issues, and also use your studies in a way that is useful for the world, just to make yourself rich, but make something out of that to make the world better. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else want to make?
Yeah, I think there's, I was just fascinated by this question about spirituality. One of our cornerstones is spirituality, actually, and we engage our communities to talk about spirituality. And the purpose of that is similar to what we've talked about, is actually to engage the farming community in understanding that their role is to help one another and to create a coalition of mutual support, which is based on spirituality and, you know, whatever their religion is. So I think spirituality is a really important component of combating poverty and hunger. Really is.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you on the panel and the spirit of spirituality that we've been discussing. Let me just say, you've been a blessing for this conference, and to the minds and hearts of everyone who has participated, and to students. Your words will be repeated, I know, and studied and evaluated with the kind of hard analysis that many of you have brought to your work. It's been admired by so many. We will be following you as you walk into the future and look, I hope you will continue to look to the Deaton Institute and the University of Missouri as a tremendous partner in what we are trying to achieve as a whole. Let me just say in closing, please join us at 11:30 for Jocelyn Brown Hall, the North American Director of FAO. We would be continuing this discussion. Thank you all so very much, and I offer my applause and suggest that others do the same. Thanks for being with us. Thank you. Wonderful.